Hello and welcome to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'll be sharing with you a requested video of how to draft and sew an asymmetric Edwardian corset. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Let's dive right into today's video. So first, I'm going to mark all my basic measurements and I'm going to place my tape, mark my shoulder to bust line, which is 9 inches, shoulder to under bust line, which is 12 inches, and I'll go ahead to mark my shoulder to waistline, which is 17 inches, and from there I'm going to mark 7 inches down for my hip point, because if you notice this dress at one point it touches the hip point. So I'll go ahead and replace all my measurements, and I'm going to go ahead and rule a straight line connecting all the lines. So after I'm done connecting, the next step I'm going to take is to go ahead and I will label all my pattern. So after I'm done labeling, the next thing is to go ahead to mark out my shoulder. So I'm going to place my tape and mark my shoulder divided by 2, which is 14 divided by 2, 7.5 inch, because I'm attaching sleeve, which gives me 7.5, and I will go down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope or shoulder slant it that way. Now the next is to get your chest line, which is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So mine is 7 inches, and I'm going to rule a line at that point. Place my ruler, whatever I have at the shoulder, which is 7.5, I will go ahead and mark at this point, connect it back to the line. So after I'm done doing that, I'm just going to divide what I have here into 2. Dividing it into 2, I have 3.5 inches, and I'm going to mark at that point, go in by ½ inch. So afterwards, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll go ahead to place my French curve, connect from that point at the center down to the lower part, and from the center I'm going to connect upwards. So this is my armhole curve, and the next step I'll do is to just go ahead and outline it. So after I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and draw out my neckline of 3 inches by 4 width, and the depth is 4 inches, and I'm just going to go ahead and use my French curve to connect. So this is not a standard neckline, you can use any neckline of your choice. So I'm just going to outline it so that it's going to be more visible for you to see. So after I'm done doing that, the next step is to mark my dart, and to do that I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. So my nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2, I have 3.5. So I'm going to go ahead to mark out my 3.5 inches on the bust line, under bust, waistline, and also at the hip point. So next I'm going to go ahead to use my ruler, and I'm going to place connecting all the lines. So after I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and mark 1 inch dart at my waistline at both sides, and I'll also do that at my under bust. Go ahead and place my ruler, and I will connect to draw a straight line from that point. And then I'm going to place my rule, connect to my hip point from my waistline down to the hip point this way. Place on the other side, and I'll connect. So I'll just go ahead and use my marker to outline it to make it more visible for you to see. So the next step I'm going to take is to place my French curve touching my under bust down to my bust line, and I'm going to also place it at the other point and draw out this way. So after that, I'll place my ruler above, my tape above my chest line, and I'll mark 2 inches and place my ruler and rule a line on that point. So that is where my cup is going to start, and I'll go in from ½ inch from my chest line, then place my tape to get my bust gauging, and I'm going to mark 1.2 from there, place my cup, and I will connect. So this is what I have at this point. Divide what I have at my shoulder into 2, connect it to that line at my chest line this way. So the next step I'm going to take right now is to mark my dart intake 1 inch at both sides, and I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to connect it to that point at the upper part. So after I'm done connecting, the next step I'm going to take is is to go ahead and outline it so that it's going to be more visible. Now I'm going to connect my cup and I'm going to place my French curve and connect this way. So what we have is not so deep. And next, after that, I'll go ahead and label my cup, place my tape and mark my bust circumference divided by 4. So what I have between there, that's my armhole and my bust circumference, divide it into 2 and I'm going to place my French curve and connect it downwards. So you can go down by ½ inch after your chest line. So after this, I'm just going to place my French curve, connect from that point, and I'm going to, before connecting, I'm going to make sure what I have on that point meets, because it's very important for your yoke. And I'm going to go ahead to connect it down to my chest line, and this is what I have at this part. Label my cup as B and place my French curve to draw out the neckline on top. So after this, my yoke part is ready and my cup is ready. Now I'm going to place my tape and mark my body circumference. I'm going to mark the bust circumference, then measure the dart intake 2 inches I have on top, replace it and mark my sewing allowance. Do that at my bust line. At the under bust, I'll mark my under bust circumference, measure the dart intake and mark my sewing allowance. At the waistline, I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4. Measure the dart intake I took out and I will replace it and go ahead and mark my sewing allowance. At the hip line, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4. Go ahead and add ½ inch just in case, and I'm going to add my sewing allowance to that. So I'm just going to connect what I have from the upper part down to the bust line, down to the waistline, and from the waistline I'm going to connect down to the hip point this way. So next thing is just to go ahead to cut out my pattern before we can go ahead to alter the waistline of this corset. So I'll go ahead and open my pattern and retrace the line I have at the waistline. So from my waistline, I'll place my tape and I'll come down by 1.5 inches. You can as well leave yours at your waist, but from what we have at the thumbnail, it's a bit lower from the waistline, and I'm going to go ahead and connect it down to the hip point. So you can also go up by 1 inch at your hip point. So after that, I'll just go ahead and retrace what I have at this point. So I'll just go ahead and cut out the lower part because we won't be needing this again. And now I'm going to open up my pattern to show you what I have. So I'll just fold it back and I'll trace out the shoulder line. It is not too straight and I'll cut it out. Now I'll label this as yoke and I will go ahead to cut out my pattern. So at this point, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please hit on the subscribe button. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you have any question, please leave it at the comment section. So after I'm done cutting out my pattern, this is what I have, and next we'll be moving over to the back pattern of this corset. So I've gone ahead to mark out all my measurements and I added my zipper allowance just the same way we marked the front, and the neckline I use is 3 by 2.5 inches. So just the same way I marked my front is the same way I marked my back. The only difference is that I have a zip. Now I'm going to place my tape and I'm going to get my dart line, so which is my shoulder to bust line plus 1 inch, giving me 10 inches. So after that, I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. I'm starting all my measurements after the zipper allowance. So I'll mark 3.5 inches. Go ahead and mark it at this point and to the end of the pattern. So the next step is just to go ahead to connect and draw a straight line. So after I'm done drawing the straight line, I'll mark ½ inch at both sides for my dart intake at the waistline, connect it down to that point. So I've gone ahead to connect it and I'll connect it down to the lower point, and this is what I have after connecting it to the lower point. I'll go ahead and use my marker to mark it out, and I'll draw out my chest line and that part will serve as my yoke. I'll come down by 1/2 inch or 1 inch and connect it back to the line I have at the center of my dress. So this is the yoke part of the upper part. Now we'll be marking the body circumference. So I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, add my sewing allowance because I don't have that. At the under bust, mark my under bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace it, and I will mark my sewing allowance. At the waistline, mark the waistline divided by 4, mark the dart intake, replace it, mark my sewing allowance. At the hip line, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I will mark my sewing allowance. So you can just go ahead and add 1/2 inch just in case you have any excess or cut out. You can just cut it out later. So I'll just go ahead and connect back my pattern, and this is what I have, as simple as that. Now I'll mark 1/2 inch at the zipper part, and I'm going to take it upwards to take out the bulginess at the back of the dress. So I'll just extend this line up, but I'll still cut it out later. So next step is just to cut out that bulginess at the back of the dress, and I will go ahead to cut out all my pattern. So just like I said, if you have any question, please go ahead and ask the question at the comment section, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. So this is what I have after cutting out, and I'm just going to go ahead to tape the lower part of this dress just to show you what the back pattern will look like, and I'll go ahead to pin out the zipper allowance also. So after taping it out, this is what I have, and I'm going to pin the zipper allowance. So first, I was supposed to cut out the waistline at this part, but cutting it out will be very confusing for some people. So we'll be altering the waistline of this pattern when we are actually sewing the dress so that it won't be too confusing. So moving over to the skirt pattern first, I'm going to mark out all the measurements we need, starting from the ruche part to the skirt length and to the folding allowance. So first, if you notice in our pattern, from our waistline, we went down by 1.5 inches at one part. So we're going to take note of that, and doing that, I have 18.5. So to get my skirt length is 36 inches. That is what I'm using, and I'll mark 2 inches for my folding allowance. After marking my folding allowance, I'll take my tape up. So my waistline stopped at 17.5. So remember that we came down by 1.5 inches from the waistline, which is 18.5. So from there, I'm going to count 7 inches down for my hip line. So I'll go ahead and extend that line for my hip line. So after that, I'm going to be inserting my measurement at the upper part for my waistline. So I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4, mark my 1.5 inch for sewing allowance, mark my hip circumference divided by 4, mark my sewing allowance, and whatever I have at the hip line, I'm going to go ahead and minus 1.5 inches, which is 40 divided by 4. I have 10 plus 1.5, 11.5. I will take away 1.5 from it, and I'll have 10.5. Go ahead, connect from my waist down to the hip point, and from the hip point down to the lower part of my skirt. So after doing this, I'm just going to go ahead to cut out my pattern. So after cutting out my skirt pattern, this is what I have for the front. So for the extra material for the ruche, I'll be doing that when I'm cutting out the main fabric, and this is the back pattern. I added zipper allowance. So join us in our next video where we'll be sewing this pattern.